Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the author for bringing the bill. I'm proud to co-author. I want to thank our young people for being here today who are engaged in some civics education here. And I think that really is the point. This is an extension of our civics education efforts and creating habitual voters, educating young people about the process before they go off to community college or maybe not college into the workforce or higher education or other avenues. So this is a captive audience, if you will, in the classroom with a trained civics teacher. I carried a previous ACA 7, which unfortunately was unsuccessful, which would have enabled 17-year-olds to vote in primaries if they would be 18 by the general election. My father carried ACA 17 to do the same thing when he was in the legislature. But before he was a member of the legislature, he was a 35-year civics teacher, and he would take his young people, his students, to the school board meetings and to city council meetings. And the key was they were able to see the direct relevance of their participation, their awareness of what their local officials were doing, the decision-making process, how they as individuals could facilitate and influence that process. So one of my concerns is we have lots of energy and excitement around presidential years, but then that participation and excitement drops off in non-presidential years when some of these elections occur. So for a whole host of reasons, I think this is good policy, obviously not without controversy, but we in the state have to put more effort into creating citizens. And the importance and the value of citizenship and voting and participation. We have, I think, a civics participation crisis on our hands in non-presidential years. And this is about addressing that issue. So I thank our young people for being here. Proud to move the bill.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Mr. Nazarian.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. And again, thank you for bringing this bill forward. I think you know that I have some hesitation and reluctance on this. I did not support a previous bill that had come here, and I was conflicted then as I am now. I very much do appreciate all of the students also participating here and joining us today. You know, we keep on talking about immigrants. I am an immigrant. I didn't become a citizen until I was 23. I participated in my first election at 24, and I got my parents to vote after that, and they've been voting since. I've not missed an election since I've become a citizen. I don't have a problem with, shouldn't even start that way. I would love to see more people participate. I just feel there is so much effort skirting around the edges of issues as opposed to looking at drastically reform election systems themselves so that we can increase voter turnout. We're stuck still with decisions we made 300 years ago as to why we need to have elections on Tuesdays.
Right.
We should do it on weekends and have it both days so that people are not working and they can participate in the process and not feel a certain pressure, burden, fear of job loss or anything else, or in current modern LA times or San Francisco times, given the affordability of housing issues, people have to work in LA driving all the way from Bakersfield. They are not going to vote unless if they vote by mail. In fact, that's what I do. I always get my absentee ballot, and if I'm home on election day, I'll go. I like the feeling and the pride of actually voting, and I take my children with me so that they get ingrained from day one that what it's about, and for them to participate. But my concerns with the bill that we heard previously was that while it'll excite and create an enthusiastic approach among a certain group of activists, the same bell curve that affects you affects older voters. And we're constantly trying to come up with ways of encouraging individuals to participate. But it also I'm concerned about, and I don't know how valid this is, I can see how instances like this can become very manipulated, and how a place of education becomes a place of concerted effort to influence. I could be wrong, but experience says that I'm not. I've seen things like that happen before. I've seen pressure build up, and I don't necessarily want to see that happen, yet one layer of pressure be built up in schools for students. So I still don't know if I were to vote, it would only to offer you a courtesy vote, but I don't think I'd be supporting it on the floor. So that's where I'm at. I want to join you in making these big reforms. I'd love to do that. But until then, I think these steps don't necessarily get to the heart of the issue that I know you very much want to address.
And if I can, and I'll take a courtesy vote. I'm not opposed to that. And I'll tell you why it's so important, that courtesy vote would be so important. I have no misgivings. This is a 2/3 vote. I cannot get this off the floor. But I think the discussion's important. We're having this discussion. People are thinking about it. We've gotten ideas. People are processing it, because it's not going to happen overnight. And I think big reforms, as you know, like I've worked on a lot of these with Mr. Mullen, and I tend to really, I think you guys heard of Bill earlier with some pretty big reforms of the way we do elections. I totally agree with you. We got to continue down that path of how we approach elections and how we make it as accessible as possible. That's one thing. The other problem we have is with interest and turnout, and you're right. It's a bell curve. It's a bell curve for us. And what I have found in my past electoral experience prior to coming to here is one of the leading reasons people don't vote is they don't know how their vote affects their real life. We often sit in this building and talk about big things, and we know how it affects the voters' lives, but it's 3 steps removed from what they're doing. So, for example, when we go talk to working class voters and we talk about the minimum wage, if they're minimum wage workers, they get how that affects their life. They get why voting for someone who either supports or doesn't support that affects their life. If you talk to small business folks and direct regulation, you can make that key. The beauty of this proposal, and the reason I think that we get lifelong voters out of it, is we are handing these new voters something that clearly they know. You don't even have to make the case. Why does the school board affect your life? Every kid could tell you. I'm sorry I call you guys kids. I want to be a kid. Again, I talk to my 20-year-old. And the other thing I'd say is, as far as undue influence or politicization, there are 18-year-olds in high school right now, right? And we've seen efforts and good efforts, I think, to try to register them to vote by their civics teachers, by the government teachers, to involve, to have debate about policy matters. They do that now. I don't think that changing it to 16 is going to have a difference. There's still state laws that prohibit, campaigning or electioneering by the teacher. I don't think that's going to change. I think what this does, though, is it does allow a civics class to say, hey, who's registered to vote? Right now, we know, right now we go into schools and we're like, who's 18? Who's going to be 18 by this date? If you're by 18 by this date, come over here. Let's talk about registering to vote. This is everybody in that classroom or that age division, right? For the most part, 16-year-olds are in high school. So it offers an opportunity for a civics lesson to be real, hands-on, right there. And we know that once you make that most obvious connection, how the school board affects my life and why my vote matters, that the subsequent connections, why the city council matters, why the state assembly matters, why the president matters, is much easier to make because they're already a voter. They already get it. So this is, I think, one of those big reforms. And I understand if you couldn't vote for it and I know the chair's feelings as well. We are seatmates, and we've talked about this a lot. I understand if you can't vote for it on the floor. I am asking for the opportunity to once again introduce this to a broader audience so we can start thinking about it. It took a long time to lower the voting age to 18, and as this student reminded me, she just wanted to make sure you knew it was because of the draft, because she knows her history, which was awesome. And that finally is what got the draft actually became the reason by which people started saying, okay, that makes sense, because the efforts were far before the war. And so this just provides an opportunity Chair told me to wrap up. I just, and I'll take this as my close unless there's any questions. This just provides an opportunity to start to have that discussion. I'd love to have this discussion on the floor because people have to become comfortable with it. It's not going to happen overnight. This is a long-term discussion. I want to have this discussion in a broader audience. So,
No.
no.
I just, because we could go on all day. I believe that very, very honestly, because this, I want to thank you, first of all, for this is, my recommendation is of this bill is a non-recommendation. And in the same manner that I did with another bill that came forward with a similar concept of 16-year-old voting. And my rationale for that is based on a number of things, but I appreciate all of those who came today, as well as those who came last time and had a very strong interest in that. Voting is extremely important to me, and I think it's important. It should be important to every American. Coming from a family who was obviously denied the right to vote, who were citizens in this country for many years, with many obstacles to voting, voting becomes an extremely important part of my life, my culture, my family's life. My family was so ingrained in voting that our home was actually a voting poll my entire life. And so we all understood the value of voting, and all 8 of my brothers and sisters voted their entire life, never missed an election, no matter how small it was, how insignificant, and so did my parents. So I take voting as a very serious thing, very serious. It's interesting that I've worked with young people all of my life as a university professor, and as well as with a number of youth groups in my community. I have a youth advisory committee in San Diego right now that's involved in a number of pieces of legislation. When I asked them about 16-year-old voting, they resoundingly said no. Which was interesting. Now, I realize that may require a lot more information on their part and some interest, but they didn't feel that this was something 16-year-olds should do. They felt there were too many other crises in their lives to actually seriously consider voting. And this was something coming from them without me saying, this is my position, this is what I think, and I put it in different ways, or what about this or that, and they consistently said no. And I know there's a population of young people who are much more politically engaged, and some kind of in the middle and some somewhere else. So there's this wide range, kind of like we are as adults, you know, in terms of the ability to do that. So I appreciate those who've come. I appreciate the interest that's there. One of the things I do become concerned about, and that is the fact that we have not really addressed the issue of voting itself and the low voter turnout. I don't think 16 and 17-year-old voting will really address it, because the other layers of the society are still present in terms of folks not voting. And so we thought when we moved from 21 to 18 that would have greater voter turnout, because we felt people would have a vested interest, because they were being drafted at that time and taken to Vietnam. They were allowed to enter in contracts, get married, do all kinds of things, and die for their country. And we see that didn't really respond to the issue effectively. So I think there are much greater things that we have to deal with before, and it's not just a matter of age. It's because I can't tell why it should be 16 and not 15. And I know in the state of California, we have actually moved some issues like smoking to a higher age rather than 18. So there's a whole discussion about age itself. My concern is that as we take this forward, my concern is that there still needs to be a lot more discussion, a lot more research, a lot more information that's available. I'm not sure if our floor is the place to do it, because oftentimes things get on the floor and they become so politicized by slogans and statements and party interest in terms of Dems versus Republican and who's going to get the more votes and then less votes and the this and the that it basically would devalue the conversation much more than highlight or bring the conversation forward. We see this often in the slogans that are thrown out, whether it's dealing with reform in the sense of sentencing reforms and things like that. They become more sloganized, but most of us have had a little bit more information and hearings on the matter that we can kind of get beyond it, but the media still picks up on it. And so as a result, you know, I could see the pictures of cartoons of who's voting and who's not voting and all those kinds of things that have a tendency to devalue the conversation, and I don't think it should be devalued in that way. I have suggested to Ms. Gonzalez that we should probably hold hearings here at the Capitol to discuss this matter, rather than having a floor session and the food fight that occurs sometimes there, but much more intelligent discussion about what happens and why we're voting and why we're not voting and where the research is and what should be the group and that group that should vote. because this is a major departure from what people think in terms of voting. 18 was a major departure, and it didn't happen overnight. It happened after much discussion, much debate, and a whole lot of other things before it actually just became something that we embraced. So with that in mind, I really appreciate the interest that's here. I realize in my own district that the ideas are very different from one community to the next. I know San Francisco is another world in itself, so I never take that as my standard. No offense to my San Francisco friends, but I know that's not the norm. So I have a tendency to want to see what's happening around the state and with others as to how we look at this issue, and do we once again keep trying to solve, as Mr. Nazarian pointed out, trying to solve our problems by lowering the age. And in that thinking it will increase the turnout when we got some real fundamental issues about. We have a lot of fundamental issues, first of all, about civic education that doesn't exist in correct form in every school. Things I learned in government classes 100 years ago, people don't do anymore. So this whole issue of civic engagement is so very different than what we teach now in terms of what ought to be taught in terms of young people and understanding this whole voting process. The participation and how to engage young people in very early in the process. I think we do a little bit of it because I see young people serving on the polls and basically participating at that level. And I see a lot more participating in campaigns, which is a good thing. And as a result, makes them lifelong participants in the process. And so there needs to be a number of things that we kind of bring young people into early in the game, long before they're 16, to basically really get their mind to thinking about it. I think no matter what age you start off, there'll always be a learning curve. Whether you start at 16 or 18, you're going to have a learning curve of who are all these people and who are all these organizations and things. So I really encourage the author and the supporters to do this. I've talked to our staff and others, and I think we will seriously look at doing hearings here at the state to talk about the voting age, and we want to do some things automatically on voter turnout because we're all concerned about the low voter turnout and whether age participates parts in it, whether it's voting on certain times of the day, whether opening up these voting centers, whether expanding the hours, a host of things that really don't address the population of California and the people who live here now. It's kind of like banks that used to only be open from 10 to 3 until they realized that people before 10 and after 3 not only had jobs but also had money. And so as a result, they start opening up our banks earlier in the morning and keeping them open to 5 because other people had money other than, quote, banker's hours. And so sometimes folks have to adjust and change what the culture has. So with that, I'm recommending a non-recommendation because I don't think it's ready yet for prime time, in other words, for be on the floor. But I do think the conversation has to continue, and I'm committed to making sure that does happen.
Chairwoman, could I ask, I'm happy to withdraw or ask Mr. Mullen to withdraw his motion since it seems to not have a second. But I would ask a commitment that we have those hearings not only here in the Capitol but also one in San Diego, obviously for us during the September, October time period to engage these young people and maybe come back then again with a proposal next year and try to ensure that we've had adequate time to sample the state on young people and some of the research and stuff that you're asking for.
Well, one of the things the current speaker has asked that to make a priority is to us to look at voter turnout. And we will be doing that with not only some bills that will be coming forward, but we'll also, I've committed to do some things not only in San Diego, but up and down the state. And I'm going to encourage the members here of the committee to do likewise, because I think all of us who serve on this committee are concerned about the elections. And that's why we continue to serve here and want to basically open up the conversation of age, what's appropriate age, whether it should be school board or something else, because there's much concern about that, whether there should be various kinds of things. There might even be situations where emancipated minors are given the right to vote, because they have much more things going on in their life, and they're much more have to deal with their own life, and they're not relying upon their parents to vote for them. So an emancipated minor might be somebody that we look at very carefully as a person who's eligible to vote. I mean, there are a lot of things I think that we haven't actually discussed, rather than just doing a quick thing about it and then thinking that will solve our problem, and it doesn't. We still have that problem. But I'm committed to doing San Diego and beyond. beyond, and I will work with our members to encourage them to do so. And we will try to have a robust discussion about age as well as other variables that affect voting, so that we can really get a handle around this low voter turnout. And really, even looking at our civics education is so important, because it shouldn't be driven by everybody's excited now because we have 2 exciting candidates running for office. You know, people should be excited every time there's an election, and we should be participating every time there's an election. And it's you know, you'll find the same apathy in 16-year-olds as we do among 18 and 20-year-olds if we don't get it right and we don't do some things that we think are important to really create an enthusiasm for voting in California. You know, I get concerned when I go to other countries, and I travel to African countries almost every year, and I'm just amazed at the number of folks who vote, who will stand in line all day to vote. The importance of voting, the importance of participating, the importance of the selection. You know, it's just T-shirts with presidents' faces on them and all kinds of things. Every time when I get off the plane, I see the enthusiasm in Ghana and other places about this is democracy. We have a chance to make a difference. And the speaker and I are talking about doing some videos and things to help people understand just how significant this one act is in California and around the world, because it didn't always exist for everybody. And we want to make sure that people get that passion and understand it. And our most consistent voters are often those who are older, and African American women are the most consistent voters because they remember when they couldn't. And we want to try to get their voices on video and make sure that young people hear it and understand the real drive and passion, and understand the gift that's been given to them, the right to vote. So with that in mind, I'm sure Mr. Mullen is pulling his motion.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, Madam Chair. And with that understanding, I will withdraw the motion and put a plug in for the Bay Area participating as well. A very valued conversation to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing it forward. And thank you all for coming. And I think you were here before, right? Did you come with Mr. Thurman? These are new ones. Okay. Okay. All right. New faces. New faces. All right. Thank you so very much for coming. That bill has pulled at this time. We're going to open the roll for those who haven't had a chance to vote. Okay. We're going to open the roll. I think we're opening it for Mr. Lowe. Yes. Mr. Lowe, are you prepared? You ready?
Mr. Lowe, on item number 3, SB 958, by Senator Lara, the motion is due pass as amended and re-refer to local government. Lowe is aye. Item 4, SB 1011 by Senator Mendoza, the motion is due pass as amended and re-refer to Committee on Local Government. Mr. Lowe? Not voting. Item 5, SB 1107 by Senator Allen. The motion is due pass as amended and re-refer to Committee on Appropriations. Lowe, aye. Item 6, SB 1108 by Senator Allen. The motion is due pass and re-refer to the Committee on Local Government. Mr. Lowe? Aye. Lowe, aye. Item 7, SB 1349 by Senator Hertzberg. The motion is due pass and re-refer to Committee on Appropriations. Mr. Lowe? Aye. Lowe, aye. And that concludes.
Okay. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.